Okay, welcome to the Illegitimate Scholar Podcast, the podcast where we assert our right to share our unsolicited opinions on culture, history, social studies, and human nature. This is episode 8. Okay, so I finally have something that I'm going to say at the beginning of the episode. I'm going to tweak that because I spent about a few seconds thinking the first thing that came to my mind, which, I kind of did on purpose because I thought that it'd be good to just think about what I think I'm trying to do here, but it's gonna change as it goes on, because I have a very rough estimate of what I want to accomplish. Not rough, but broad. So, this is a solo episode again. It's gonna come out on Monday. Oh, I got to put that in right now that this is bi-weekly. I'm doing Monday and Thursday, if somebody recognized the pattern for the 10 people that listen to this. Monday and Thursday, and I hope to keep that consistent for as long as I possibly can. And this episode is going to be on titles. And when I say titles, I mean, I guess the term would be honorifics, which are words like doctor, Mr., Mrs., titles that come before your name. Could be captain, could be your honor, things like that. Actually, not all of them come before your name, because there's also Esquire for a lawyer, real douchey, but it exists. And so what I asked when I was writing this is, why do some jobs get referred to by their title and others not? And how are some jobs and positions in society valued over others, and why? So a lot of this is going to be about how we, as a society in general, how a lot of people will treat other people a certain way based on, specifically today, their position in society. Maybe a congressperson, doctor, what specific job they have, and what kind of conveys social status. And there's other things that do this, like somebody that's attractive. There's a stigma against ugly people. There is. Ugly people get longer prison sentences, and that's not a lie. Skin color, obviously. Just the way people dress. There's lots of things that lend themselves to social standing, but honorifics are one of them, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on today, and maybe do some of those other ones later. Okay, so the thing that got me thinking about this initially was an interaction that I had with somebody, and this was one of those interactions where, as it was happening, I was thinking about it. I was in deep thought, as I was saying what I was saying, even in the conversation, because I was surprised at this person's reactions, and I was trying to get to the root of their feelings about it, because this person got a little upset with me when this happened, but I didn't think that I was saying anything that should be upsetting. And this is this other person's personal perception about they obviously took this a very different way than I did, and they have different values than I do. So I was looking at the root of what that was. And so what happened is I was talking to this girl that I was in college in. What did I just say? I was talking to this girl that I was in college with, and her dad was a medical doctor. And I don't know how we got on the topic of it, but she said that her dad's wage was justified because he works hard or something, and makes a lot of money. We were probably having some discussion about wealth inequality, and my response was well, people work pretty hard at Dunkin' Donuts too, and I meant it. I wasn't making a joke. I wasn't I wasn't trying to insult either her father or Dunkin' Donuts employees, because okay, I'm from New England. I'm always talking about New England. In New England, Dunkin's our main thing. America might not run on Dunkin', but New England sure does. So, a lot of New Englanders in their morning, they go up and get their Dunkies, and they get in the long line, and it goes fast as shit because there's an army of either teenagers, young adults, a lot of time immigrants, and also just everyday middle-aged white people just in there working their damn dicks off. Like they are working very hard from what I see, and they're remembering all these different things at once. They're making all these different drinks at once. They're working like a goddamn well-oiled machine in theory. Some locations better than others, but there's 10 people in that fucking place, and they're coordinated, and they get drinks out and food out correctly, quickly, like very efficiently. And so I noticed that. I've noticed that before. So when I'm thinking about someone working hard, and also the lengths of shifts and waking up in the morning and everything. But anyway, like if you hear me say that, compare somebody working hard as a doctor to working hard at Dunkin' Donuts, and you're offended by that, like why can't? And this is what happened. She was offended by me saying that. She was like, my dad works harder than someone who works at Dunkin' Donuts. I'm like, I don't know if that's true. He might have more like expertise. He might have worked very hard in school, but I don't know if like in the moment that he's being a doctor, it's probably more stressful and probably in a more, stakes higher way, depending on if you're a doctor dealing with some emotional trauma. But, there's plenty of stuff that happens at Dunkin' Donuts that's not great as well. And I'm sure it's very stressful. I guess why do we have to compare it? But if you're offended by this comparison, is it because you hold doctors in such high regard, or is it because you hold fast food employees in low regard? Or is it something else entirely that I'm missing? But it feels to me like we should be able to say that somebody who works at Dunkin' Donuts has a hard job. Like it's a difficult ass, high stress, very quick paced job that people do, and often they get up very early in the morning to do it. And I'm not saying that doctors don't also have a hard job, but like they're not being paid more because of like how hard it is every day. They're being paid because of the years of experience it took to get to that position. And the fact that like there are so few of them, it's so hard to become one. Like it's probably easier to get a job at Dunkin' Donuts than it is to be a doctor. It's definitely easier to get a job at Dunkin' Donuts. It doesn't pay that well most of the time, but I think it would be very difficult to go to Dunkin' Donuts every single day, like, working 5-6 days a week at Dunkin' Donuts, going to your shifts like over years and years. I don't think a lot of people could handle that. I would find that very difficult. I think anyone would find that very difficult and it would be easier if you were making more money and had higher social status like a doctor. But still, all jobs are required for our society. Like all jobs are required to make it work. Like, yes, doctors, you can say doctors save lives, but Dunkin' Donuts, I don't know. I'm pretty sure Dunkin' Donuts saves some lives, because if Dunkin' Donuts shuts down, there's going to be some sort of shutdown in the New England economy, probably other parts of the country as well. People wouldn't handle it very well. I'm pretty sure Boston would descend back into gang violence. And I'm not saying that like doctors aren't important. What I'm really saying is Dunkin' Donuts employees are important. Every part of our economy is important, and everybody's labor that makes this shit work is important, besides some public employees. But those aren't in the private sector. If you're working in the private sector, you're making the economy work. You're part of it. And Dunkin' Donuts is important. These motherfuckers are out there in a New England blizzard opening that motherfucker up because they know that the guys and girls and women that are clearing the roads with their fucking trucks at 4:00 in the morning so that people can get to work and everything, they need their Dunkachino. And, a little snowstorm isn't going to stop somebody from going to work. I wish that it could, but Dunkin' Donuts employees are are just that essential to New England. God damn, I spent the first 10 minutes just talking about Dunkin' Donuts. But yeah, all jobs are required for our society, regardless of how difficult they are. Like if they weren't, like that's the invisible hand at work. That's the free market in capitalism, in theory, is that the job is created and somebody gets that job because that job is making money for the economy. And money circulating in the economy is ultimately what keeps everything going. If everybody stopped spending money today for some reason, our entire economy, everything would collapse. The government would collapse because that's how we distribute goods. Money moving around, people purchasing things is how we distribute goods of all kinds, including heat and energy and food, and all the things that we need are essential. And it includes like even public utilities, because public employees get paid in dollars. And if for some reason people couldn't exchange dollars anymore, the distribution system would stop. Trucks would stop moving goods. People would stop working at stores that would sell things. Immediate looting, of course. Like, what are the cops going to do? They're not getting paid. They got to take care of their families. Like, if somehow money stopped flowing, if money could no longer be used to purchase things, the entire country dissolves. And that means that every single part of the economy plays a role in it, regardless of how important you think it is. But a doctor, this is going to be a long fucking episode. I just rambled and rambled. But a doctor gets called a doctor. You know, there's a social standing along with that. And maybe there should be, but you know, there's other ones as well. And you know, I'm not saying that none of these jobs deserve social respect. What I am saying is it's noteworthy that there are some jobs that get specific titles that confer, social standing, while other people, you know, you're just a mister. If you're like a teacher and you're walking around in public, you're a mister. If you're a judge or a policeman or a professor or something, somebody might call you by doctor or officer or something like that. You know, and only certain jobs do that, and it's not always the ones that pay the most, but they often come with them social standing. So I kind of relate it. What it makes me think of is it's a reflection of what society thinks is noteworthy in certain ways. And there are plenty of jobs that don't have titles that are very noteworthy, but some of these honors are correlated to education. You know, so getting a PhD or a doctorate would make you a doctor. Some of them are related to like a political institution, like, for example, being knighted by the Queen. That's not really a reflection of getting a school degree, but it is a reflection of what's regarded as a very important social construct, the monarchy, giving you a title that sets you apart. And that not only legitimizes you as somebody recognized by the monarchy, it legitimizes the monarchy in a way that they are able to give out these titles. And the same with universities. You know, a PhD that comes out of Harvard has that distinction of being not only a PhD, but a PhD from Harvard. And if that person does high quality things, they've been brought up to this level of being a PhD from Harvard specifically. So what they accomplish now at that elevated level of the social power that they get from being related to Harvard's network, they then will successfully, on average, be very successful in the world, and they'll continue to keep the name of Harvard very highly regarded. And this happens over time. I'm going to discuss universities in depth specifically. But give me a moment to gather my thoughts here, because I think I went a little bit out of order. So these honorifics are a reflection of what society as a whole deems important. And only some jobs have them, some positions have them. I listed doctor, sometimes a captain of a ship will be called captain, professor, father, or reverend, or whatever for a religious person. And some of these get called this just in the specific context, and some of them are just sometimes or all the time in public. Some PhDs will get upset if you call them Mr. because they think they deserve the title doctor. Now, outside of the context of a college classroom, it's hard to actually enforce that. So I recommend that anybody who knows a doctor who wants to be called doctor and you don't care about souring that relationship, which you probably should, because you probably shouldn't antagonize anybody like this, but fuck them for wanting to be called something special outside. Like, oh, you need that validation? Like, so somebody's going to call the redneck driving a big-ass truck or has a big gun, like, oh, yeah, your dick's small, you're compensating, huh? How about you fucking professors? Or even physicians that want to walk around in public and with their tweed fucking jacket with the stick so far up their ass that it straightens their back, and they're walking around with their nose up, and they want to be called doctor by everyone around them. Go fuck yourself. That's bullshit. That's you're just like them. That's little dick energy. You need validation from people like that. I'm not a fan of it. I'm not a fan. Last week we talked about the military a little bit, and I was, when I was an NCO and I was a corporal, nobody called me corporal because I told them not to. I didn't want to get that. When I was a teacher, when I was doing my teaching degree, and I was doing my student teaching, so I was teaching a full class load for just a few months. At the school I was at, I wasn't allowed to let the students call me Sam. They had to call me by my last name. So, they're calling me Mr. Gallagher, and I would prefer that they don't call me Mr. Gallagher. I would prefer that they called me Sam, but, they did, which I had to let them do because this was the school. If I didn't make them call me Mr., then in their mind it changes the social dynamic where I'm supposed to be the superior and they're supposed to be inferior to me. And there's an interaction there that puts me above them, or any teacher above their students, of social distance. And that's what these terms a lot of the times are, where, by going by Mr. whatever, I'm signaling Mr. Gallagher that I'm above them and I need to have a certain amount of respect. And, when you're in charge of a classroom, you have to do that. But at the same time, I don't know if that's perfect and conducive to, the type of world that we're living in 2022. Or maybe we need more of that. I'm not sure. It could go either way. But ultimately, what that brings me to is the way that people interact in real life, because high school is not real life. It's completely ridiculous. But so how these terms are used in person, like this conveys social status. Like if somebody's walking around and they're a carpenter and they go by Mr. Smith, but there's a lawyer and he goes by Mr. Gene, or not Mr. Gene, or not a lawyer, a doctor. There's a doctor. He's Dr. Gene. The carpenter's Mr. Smith. So one of them is a Mr. and one of them's a doctor. Doctor gets a special term, even though the carpenter is making something gorgeous and amazing, and that doctor might be committing medical malpractice every day. But he's still a doctor, and in the eyes of the greater community, he's more important and deserves his own respect. He deserves extra respect than the other people, even though Jesus was a carpenter. But whatever, I didn't do that on purpose. That's how I ended up. So before I go on to talking about doctorates, or not, honorifics over time, before I go on and talk about how they've changed over time, I want to bring up the argument of who gets to be called a doctor, because there's different types of doctorates, right? There's doctors of chiropractic, chiropractors, those guys that crack your your bones. It's probably not the right way to describe them, but some of those chiropractors have gotten in trouble for calling themselves doctors, even though they have like PhDs or something. It might not be a PhD. It's some sort of doctorate. And a lot of people I've heard just say that only physicians should be called doctor, but other people, PhDs are called doctor sometimes. People with EdDs, educational doctorates, which I think are even less worthy of being called doctor than PhDs. And sometimes it's like somebody like a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner. They're not a doctor or have any sort of doctorate, but like I call them a doctor in the medical context. Apparently, after doing some research, I learned, though, that the root of the word doctor is actually scholar. So before there was doctors that like physicians, there was there was doctors that were the term referred to scholars. So essentially, probably like the institutional beginnings of what is now PhDs, people that are doing research in liberal arts and things like that. No one with a PhD is gonna listen to this shit, so it's fine. I needed to bring up, actually, in The Hangover, the original Hangover from 2009, that fucking masterpiece. There's a dentist who has a doctorate degree in dentistry, and I've actually heard that it's harder to do a dentist, to go to dental school than it is to go to medical school. But they make fun of him for the entire movie for calling himself a doctor, and they call him Dr. Faggot at a certain point, which was okay to do in 2009, and it's really okay to do anymore. And I definitely had a different perception of the word faggot in 2009 than I do now, and now I'm only using it in this context of quoting the movie. I wouldn't use it in like a normal. I wouldn't say it myself when I'm not quoting something anymore, but I would have in 2009. Wouldn't think anything of it. It wasn't homophobic, but that's the way it was. That's totally a separate topic, but the way that people have perceived things and what is okay and what isn't okay has changed extraordinarily quickly over my life. And a lot of people my age, I know, feel the same way. So now I'm going to talk about honorifics over time. And I think I touched on earlier, like, the how the legitimacy of certain colleges, the legitimacy of the monarchy was assisted, how it is created by them legitimizing people with knighthoods and with degrees, and how there is a mutual relationship of reciprocity. There's a mutual relationship of an individual and a group legitimizing each other. So an individual that is legitimized by a group, in this case, a college or the monarchy, they get legitimized, and that helps them succeed. They get legitimized by titles and awards and degrees. And in return, they do things, just the sense that they have this award, that they accept this award, and it's important enough to them. It legitimizes that award. It raises the prestige of that award if someone that is important is receiving that award or that piece of paper. It's hard to get into a PhD at an Ivy League school or Oxford or Cambridge. So it's, or all those French ones that I can't pronounce. Sorry, France. But, hear what I just said. What I just said was Ivy League schools, Oxford, Cambridge, and the colleges in France. So I only named colleges from 3 countries because in my culture, and really the French ones don't count in my culture, and when I'm saying my culture, I'm speaking as an American, we have legitimized, likely because of the English-speaking world, the colleges of the United States and England. Those are the colleges that get the most prestige, and the greater English-speaking world, but mostly England and the United States. There are some Canadian universities held in high regard, some Scottish universities held in high regard, and again, French and German ones as well. But the main ones are going to be those Ivy League schools, plus Ivy League plus like MIT, and then Oxford, Cambridge, University College London, things like that. And the same for like award shows or anything. But the other thing, so I also talked about the monarchy and how they legitimize people with titles. And it, obviously it used to be different. The monarchy was legitimized by the fact that they were in charge of the country. But the monarchy comes from a feudal system. And the feudal system used a lot of titles. Titles like count. It used titles like count, duke, earl, duchess, all these titles. Sir for knights that were the lowest level of the feudal system. They're essentially the corporals of the feudal system. They're the lowest, what you'd call like a leadership position. They're the lowest level of the feudal. And these are honorifics. These are kind of the root of honorifics. And they would also include the clergy, so bishops. And we do that even today, Even today, clergy are still often called by their title. And as an American, and I'm a little biased because I grew up partly in the Unitarian Church, which is a Christian-derived but religiously non-denominational that does kind of respect all religions, as well as growing up in a Muslim country for 2 years. But I would call a religious leader by their title, even if it wasn't my own religion. I would call an imam, a rabbi, a priest, or a father, reverend, whatever their title is. But that's out of respect for those social institutions. So we still do that for those religious institutions. But this goes back to a time when things were feudal, and the clergy positions were hereditary in a sense, because like oftentimes it was a son would be made into a bishop because he was the second son, so he wasn't inheriting all the land in certain cultures. So he would go be a bishop, and his father would pay for that, and that would still raise the family's prestige because your kid's a bishop, and that's of high social standing, and it would come with privileges, often in the form at that time of not paying taxes. So they would only tax the peasants. But the point I'm making here, why this is important, is it's rooted in hereditary titles. These feudal titles are hereditary. They would be passed down from father to son, or father to daughter, mother to son, depending on the system of the country that had it. But these were hereditary, and they aren't in theory anymore. Mostly, obviously there's still the monarchy that comes with it, but they are hereditary in the sense that often the people who get these titles are the people who had the most privilege. A doctor is more likely to have a child that's a doctor. A PhD is more likely to have a kid that's a PhD. And these honorifics, they come from a time when there was feudalism, which had in feudalism, the lowest level of the population in most cases in the worst cases, they were essentially enslaved. With none or very little legal protections, could be slaughtered without any sort of recourse by their lord. And they weren't enslaved in the sense that they were enslaved to one person, but they didn't, in the worst cases, they didn't have freedom of movement in the sense that they were slaves more to the land, and then the feudal lord owned the land, but owning the land, it came with the human beings that were attached to it. So it was slavery with extra steps in a more direct way than capitalism is. Not that I think capitalism is slavery. That is a meme that I'm repeating. So yeah, serfdom, the worst of it, the worst type of feudalism is essentially enslavement, whereas better versions of it that gave more human rights, what we would call them today, were still pretty exploitative of the free class of people, or not the free class, but the peasant class of people that were at the bottom. And this was a deferential society, and not differential. I said deferential. They are giving deference at lower stages to people at higher social levels than them. So a peasant is socially deferential to a lord, any lord, not just their own lord, but anyone. Somebody that was a professional soldier, a knight. They're giving deference to them. They're going to tip their hat. They're going to lower their hat. And it was like this in most parts of the world, and well, it still is like this in most parts of the world, and to an extent, all of the world. We're not entirely gone from these things, and as you can see, a lot of these titles, while we don't use count or duke anymore, we still use knightings. They don't have the same. They don't have the same like power behind them, but the terms are still used. Like, people are still becoming knights, and there's still a king of England. And now it's a king. And in the UK, where they do not have free speech as we would describe it in the United States, there were people arrested for being critical of that monarchy, which is pretty much by definition tyranny. And it's what you'd expect a monarchy to do, because the monarchy is rooted in a time when people were peasants, where they were very distinctly and undisputedly lower class citizens than other people. And there were distinct social classes between them that were hereditary and immutable. So when I see these terms, even any other terms that might not have been around at the time, what I think of when certain people they're considered greater than others by society, we're always going to need a part of that, because it's part of why people go into certain things, and you need people that are willing to innovate and do great things that other people are unwilling to do. You need those people to be in good positions. But at the same time, I think that there needs to be a baseline level of respect for human life, all human life in a country, and dignity. And to get back to the story that I started with, like, my point really is that, a doctor should make more money than somebody who works at Dunkin' Donuts, because you need to incentivize people to become doctors. And it's very hard to become a doctor, and it takes a long time. But, and the moment that they're working, I don't think that the labor of a doctor is 10 times more valuable than the labor of a Dunkin' Donuts employee. And I think that a Dunkin' Donuts employee that's working, and admittedly, I think working very hard, they should make enough to survive. And in a country as rich as ours, where productivity has increased so much over the past 20, 30, 40 years, I think that people should be able to share in that prosperity a little bit more. And I think that with a little reorganization, and I'm not talking about some Maoist redistribution of wealth, a little reorientation and re-understanding about or change of understanding about who is important in society and how important people are, and why some people might be more important to society. Maybe they're not, 20 times more important, in the sense that somebody who works at Dunkin' Donuts probably makes, $30,000 a year, whereas a doctor could make, I don't know, 250 at the lowest end probably. And, they have to pay off their student loans and everything, but there's plenty of people at Dunkin' Donuts that were told to go to college by their guidance counselor, and they're now at Dunkin' Donuts, and they got loans too. Maybe not the big ones that the doctors have, but the doctors are making the money to be able to pay it. So really, I'm just encouraging a consideration of how people view other people in society based on their social standing. And I'm going to make the point in a minute that I took a little bit too much notes this time. So I'm a little bit over the place. I'm still working this out. I'm going to explain more in depth how these titles and everything, they might be more applicable. They might be more hereditary than they seem, because it seems like anybody can become a PhD, and that is true. Technically, certain people are more likely than others to get to the point of being a PhD, and then especially getting to the point of becoming a college professor. It's not an easy thing to do, and it requires not only working hard, but playing politics. And what can help is who you're born a child to, and that can help in more ways than one. But before I move on to talking about who in our society gets these honorifics and how they're maybe a little bit hereditary, over time there's been certain titles that have gone out of use. And what I wanted to do, but this got to be too long and I might go back to this, is look at other countries and how they deal with honorifics, especially countries that are rooted in a Confucian tradition, and that would be China, Korea, both Chinas, Republic of China and Taiwan, and the People's Republic of China and mainland China. So both Chinas, both Koreas, Japan, and there's a few others that have influence from them, but they have it comes from the Confucian tradition, which will get its own episode as part of a China series that I'm working on. They put a lot of emphasis not only on the titles in society, but on the reciprocal relationship that I discussed earlier between a teacher and a student, a father and a son, mother and daughter, a king and a lower noble, things like that. They put a lot of emphasis on these reciprocal relationships. But crap. Yeah, I think I went on a little bit of tangent. I'm gonna get that out later. But what I want to say is that when there is a changing. Oh, yeah, that's what I was saying. So in different cultures, who gets a title is based on the values of that culture, and a culture changing over time might stop using a certain title for certain people. And in what I've seen is, I read a lot of old newspapers. I read old newspapers. I read old books. I look at old pictures, what people were taking pictures of. I've learned a lot from doing this. And what I've come to understand is that in the past, obviously we don't use feudal titles anymore, but in the past in the United States, military officers and NCOs were referred to in public by their rank, even by somebody who is not of the military. And I think that there is something to be said about that, about the place that the military held in society in the past and how it does today. And in a lot of ways, this isn't perfect, because I would argue that in the past, the military veterans were a lot less taken care of. And I'm not even talking about Vietnam. Vietnam veterans got screwed over, and they were treated very poorly by a lot of the people back home. But I'm talking about 19th century and 1800s. And I guess there wasn't a lot that could be done then. There was no infrastructure to support veterans. But people then, especially military officers, and I think this has a lot to do with maybe respect for, maybe this is tied to feudalism and aristocracy, because the military officers traditionally have been members of the aristocracy, a heritable trait that an enlisted man could not get into the officer ranks. And it's still very difficult for an enlisted man to get in, and there is a huge cultural divide between the enlisted and the officer ranks. And enlisted members in the military are still much poorer than their officer counterparts. And that actually is... So before I get into it, because I'm about to get into that more deeply, and how about how military officers are almost hereditary in the sense that they still come from the upper class, even though we say that there's a classless society, or at least implicitly people say that by not discussing the importance of class in America, or even calling you racist when you try to bring up class. But the lowering of use of these honorifics for military officers, I think, could also be said for a difference of respect that people have for the military today than they did in the past. And I don't think that people respect the military less today. I just think it's not considered as much of a part of everyday life. It's something that people bring up when it's important. You know, they'll do their ceremonies. They'll thank you for your service, which is great. It's appreciated. It's also very weird. But there isn't... I don't know. It's not a full thought. So in the past, these titles were specifically hereditary, and today most of them aren't. But in practice, it's wealthy people that get these titles. It's often people that grew up very wealthy that become Congress people, become professors, become like we just talked about, military officers, or they're more likely to be from the wealthy class. And this has a lot to do with how they interact with the world based on what they know about the world. And it also has to do with the connections that they have, which is directly related. So the one statistic I have, these things are all true, but I don't like to get bogged down in the statistics. This is all more about thinking in general, and what I'm trying to create, and I'll explain this more later, is I'm trying to create a situation where, let me discuss the problem that I see first. A problem that I see is that people will get so bogged down in the peer-reviewed research that they will ignore things that are very obvious because they're not just taking the time to think about them without the aid of some PhD's words. And those PhDs, that research has its very important place. But I think that a lot of the times the research and the commentary associated with that research, it's very biased. It's closed into a certain group of people, and this is kind of what I'm talking about right now, because on average, only particular people become prominent PhDs. And yes, there are PhDs from all different walks of life, but they are more generally from the wealthy, aristocratic people who grew up like that. And those people have a certain way of thinking. And the types of people that will become PhDs will also be adhering to that. You can't just be a rich, like Steve-O was a rich kid, and he would never be a PhD, obviously. But somebody who meets the standards that upper class creates, those will be the people that are allowed to advance in that social construct and get to the point where they can create research, and they can effectively change the way that people think. So, and they can decide what is the information that gets to be talked about, because PhDs won't touch certain topics. They just won't engage with it. So you can't get all your information from PhDs. You can't. I mean, you can. You can sit there and read The Economist and the New York Post and the Washington Times, and you can sip your scotch and in your fucking high back leather chair and look out the window and put your feet up and think about how much better you are than those dumb rednecks in West Virginia. Or, you can do something interdisciplinary and you can think about where there are other places to learn. And God, I went off on a huge tangent again. I'm going to listen back to this. I think I said some good stuff, but I think I got to fucking reel this in like a fish. But God damn it, it's just flopping around over there. It's like an 80-pound tuna. That's not a big tuna. It's like a 140-pound tuna. Like I'm about to go in the water because it's flailing so much and I can't control it, even though in theory I should be able to. Since we're talking about my brain here, my brain is the tuna in this situation. So only 1.6% of the U.S. population holds a doctorate, but 22% of faculty have at least one parent with a PhD. So that's like it's more than 10 times. So professors are highly disproportionately from the upper class. And that's just a quarter of them, which is 1 in 4. But that's a lot. It's a huge overrepresentation that sways the it sways the group much away from the general U.S. public. And ideally, it would be a good representation of the U.S. public. And you know, there's definitely other statistics along with it. I don't want to get bogged down. The only other one I'm going to say is that median childhood income of PhDs is 24% higher than the general public. So, you know, even if a PhD's parents didn't have PhDs, they're more likely to be rich. They're more likely to have had parents with master's degrees. And in theory, these professors are going to challenge the hierarchy of the upper class and the racist white supremacist system. I mean, I'm just repeating how I generally think that, at least at my New England liberal arts school, people thought, you know, and oftentimes it seemed like a lack of self-awareness to me a lot of the times, that they were often representations of either directly the upper class or the views of the upper class, because they had to change their views. They had, or their views happen to end up like those of the upper class, because if your views do not align with the upper class in the PhDs, what I think the communists might have called the intelligentsia, then you won't be allowed in. They gatekeep for particular views, and those views can change over time. You know, what becomes acceptable, but the types of people that are in the top of academia, they're the type of people that are jumping on whatever is the new thing. Like there's memes on the internet that are like, I support current thing, and there are a lot of people that are. They see what is socially acceptable, and either subconsciously or consciously, they want to. Gosh, I'm going to get too far out if I go on this tangent. So, the last thing that I'll say on that before I go to like kind of my outro, or not my outro yet, but the conclusion I have of this, but there's a hypocrisy in what I see in universities, and I'll attack them plenty in the future. But what I see is that they want social structures challenged. They want to challenge racism, white supremacy. They want to challenge these things. In theory, sometimes they say they want to challenge the capitalist class. In practice, not as much. But they want to challenge social structures, but they are themselves in one of the key pillars of the social structure of our country, of our world, of the Western world, and of others as well. They're the ones that get to kind of set the acceptable tone. And I'm going to talk about this, but the term Latinx is a good indicator of this, because if you go to a college classroom, Latinx is the term that you're supposed to use. But there's a poll from either Gallup or Pew Research where only 5% of Hispanics, I'm using Hispanic because that was the preferred term in the poll, they like the term, that want that to be the preferred term. The most common one is Hispanic or Latino. And with things like that, if I were to come out and be like, I don't like the term Latinx as just a non-Hispanic white guy, you call me racist, because it doesn't matter what Hispanic people actually think. What matters is what the college thinks is important. And you'll find most of the Hispanic professors will be like, yeah, Latinx is fine. More so than the general population, I'm sure. They'll be like, yeah, Latinx is good. I mean, I heard about the term Latinx from a Hispanic professor. And he supported it, but and I have a lot of Hispanic friends. I love Hispanic people. None of the Hispanic people that I know like that term. They laugh at it. They think it's ridiculous. And some of them, at the worst, think that it's racist. And, it comes across like mostly rich white people telling other people how to think. And in this case, telling what they would call people of color what to think. But what they'll do is they'll grab their buddy and they'll do the academic equivalent of "I have a black friend," and they'll just be like, "Well, Professor, who's it's always like a white Hispanic black guy or Hispanic guy. It's always a white Hispanic guy. It's always like the guy that like." He looks like Emilio Estevez or Charlie Sheen, which, he's Hispanic. Like Theo Vaughn's Hispanic, but it's always like the most white-looking guy because they're often, gosh, and I'm getting too far off again, but I don't care. I'm enjoying it. And if you listen to this 50 minutes now, then you either aren't really paying attention or you somehow like my ridiculous side conversations. But often the whitest Hispanic people are that's left over from the encomienda system that was in most of Latin America, where there was a racial caste system that had white people on the top. And those white people, who would have been primarily of Portuguese and Spanish blood, they're a lot of the people that are today in positions of authority, not only in Latin America, but they're more likely to be in positions of authority in the United States, where they had where they came from some place where they were the privileged class, and they were able to, because Latin America is still the West, there's a lot of similarities between the countries and their systems. They're able to integrate into the upper class a little bit better, and knowing to follow the cultural trend and get swept along with that wave, and continuing to support whatever the upper class supports, and whatever they put out in colleges, and staying on the positive end of that and the good side of the politics that are rampant in the universities, because they're inherently elitist systems. They will go along with it, and they'll go along with whatever it is, even if it's Latinx, and they might actually support it more. It would be easier if they actually did. Anyone who truly believes the things that are coming out and are supported by colleges, they'll have an easier time of it because they don't have to pretend. They just have to be themselves. But for plenty of people, they're pretending to a certain extent, or they're play acting. And if you're somebody who's from, if you're poorer, if you're somebody that's poor, you're often from communities that have very different values, very different ways of what is offensive and what isn't. And you kind of have to, and anybody who's a college professor, I hope that this resonates with somebody, but you would have to change your value system away from the culture that you grew up with to match what is created by the elite systems, which more matches what upper class people think. And it's a reflection of that. So to wrap that up, yeah, colleges are inherently elitist institutions. A lot of the colleges that call people PhDs, doctors, legitimize their beliefs. Those colleges and other political institutions, other like judges, bar associations that legitimize people, they are often people that would have been hereditary feudal lords and things like that in the past. And they are still hereditary in a certain extent, in the sense that the views of those places are hereditary. Like the views of that still represent the upper class, but they do allow other people to join them as long as they conform. But they're going to have less people from the middle class, from the lower class. They're going to mostly be people almost all the time that come from the upper class, the upper middle class. And I'll get into a lot of these again. But what can be done? Essentially nothing can be done. These things change with the changing in the physical and the human technological environment. I'm just discussing this because it's something I think about a lot, and I hope other people think about it. And I think it's important because I think analyzing why people are in their positions in society, racially, religiously, socioeconomically, there are a lot of things that will affect where a person ends up. And especially with basically what's happening right now is the destruction of the middle class. I want to live in a country where there is more of a respect for the dignity and the lives and the struggles of the poorest Americans and the middle class. And there should be a higher baseline for how the worst people in our country are living. And when I'm saying that, I'm not only talking about poor people in general, but I'm talking about prisoners in America. I think that people who are imprisoned in prisons and in jails across the country, their status, their social status, is a factor in how they are not taken care of to a baseline level of personal dignity that I think they should be. And the way that people perceive people based on their titles and based on their own values is a big part of that. So I want people to be thinking about how they perceive other people based on all sorts of different factors, but from today, based on what titles they've received. And titles they're not granted by a higher power. They're not granted by God. They're not granted by the Buddha or by Barbra Streisand, although I'm sure some of them are by Barbra Streisand. But they're not granted by a higher power. They're granted by social constructs. Humans gave you, and they gave everybody their titles. So they're not a reflection of who that individual is in their soul and their heart. They're only a reflection of what social construct has legitimized that person in some way. And I hope that people reading this will continue to will think about it, think about how they treat people a little bit more. And I know I need to do that as well. And I hope other people aren't taking that as me being holier than thou. But I think that everybody can serve to kind of think about how they're thinking, have some meta thoughts about how we address other people and how we might not be kind to other people based on, how they are viewed socially and also, maybe their political views. And, these things will change as our culture changes. And if we're confident in the direction of our country and our culture, which right now I'm not, then we should be happy with how the way that people are dealt with in society is changing. And I think in some ways we're getting better and in some ways we're not. But if we don't figure out how to create, and when I say create, it just gets created on its own based on like how people are interacting, but create honorifics and titles and all other aspects of society that will work to continue and proliferate our system. When I say system, I mean the whole thing, socio-cultural, political, economic, all these things together, then, it won't perpetuate itself. And that's going to end in catastrophe and death. And it starts at the bottom with how people interact with each other. And a lot of times these social hierarchies that are reflected in the titles that we give people, these are the root of how society is functioning. So I think this deserves more thought. I don't necessarily think that you should go out and, egg a professor's house because they're a member of the bourgeoisie. I think that you should just, if anyone's asking for my unsolicited advice, I hope that I do this more now that I've thought about this for a few hours and talked about it for an hour. I don't want to remove social status from any job. Like, we need that. So there needs to be heroes in a society. But maybe don't give blind respect to somebody with some sort of social status. And at the same time, if somebody has low social status, you can afford to treat them with a little bit more respect than you might have if you weren't consciously thinking about it. And I've been somebody who's done that plenty of times. I think everybody has. And if somebody told me they didn't, I'd say they weren't thinking hard enough, or they're a liar, or they're just really that nice of a person. And that's someone I'd like to be friends with. So if you're that person, send me a message and we can be friends, because I like nice people. So the written down outro questions that I had, and I think I already went over this, but I'm going to read what I had written down because it might be a little bit more clear. How does the way we address people, title, or in general reflect our relationship with or social standing to someone else? So yeah, your relationship to someone else is also reflective of how you talk to them. And an obvious example of this would be like, a general to a colonel. Colonel's lower rank than a general. A general doesn't necessarily have to be. A general's not going to be deferential to a colonel, but a colonel's going to be deferential to a general. They're close in rank, so maybe we'll say a major to a general. But a major is going to talk to a corporal who's like a low-level enlisted guy, a lowest leadership rank. He's going to talk to him in a certain way, and the corporal's going to talk to the major in a different way. The major's going to talk to the corporal differently than the general. Is there anything you can think? Is there anyone you think you should give less respect to, or someone you should give more respect to? And that's not me saying that, just go punch a doctor in the face. Don't go punch a doctor in the face unless they deserve it. But there could be somebody that has a high social status and you treat them with a high level of respect, and maybe you shouldn't do that anymore. But a lot of times people with high social status, they're very influential people and they're good to have in your camp. So it might be good to, even if you don't like somebody with that status, for yourself to treat them with the respect that they might think they deserve. And by doing so, you're legitimizing their social position. But if it's the best thing for you to do, then, don't worry about their social position. Even if you don't like them, don't take that battle on yourself. Do whatever helps you achieve your goals. Or more importantly, is there someone you think you should give more respect to? If you found yourself not respecting the humanity of a homeless person. And I'm not saying, you have to trust them that, they're not going to spend the money on drugs or alcohol, which, giving a homeless person money, and if they spend it on money or alcohol or drugs, you're not really helping them. But homeless people are individuals, and a lot of them are on drugs, but a lot of them are not. And, maybe go out and talk to a homeless person. I like to talk to homeless people sometimes. And if you get a sense for, what their problem is, what they need help with the most. Sometimes they need toothbrushes, toothpaste, baby wipes can be nice. Sometimes they might need gloves, a coat. Churches and donation centers are in a lot of places very good at getting stuff that people need, but not always. And sometimes it's hard. And all I'm saying is that these are reciprocal relationships. I've talked a lot about two people in different positions legitimizing each other. So a feudal lord, a king legitimizes a duke, and by giving him a title, and then the duke fights for the king, and he legitimizes the king by serving the king and doing great stuff, and it's a beneficial relationship. When somebody is a homeless person and nobody legitimizes them, even to the level of them being a human, not deserving of even a look or talking to, or maybe you're scared of them because you think they might hurt you, which, it could be somebody with a mental health issue that maybe what might hurt you. But that doesn't mean that all people who are homeless mean you harm. And, I'm dragging out, but I think I made my point. Respect everybody at a baseline level. And, and that's all for today. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, or you want to yell at me, please email me at illegitimatescholar@gmail.com. That link is in the description of the podcast. Or please join us on Discord. It's just me and my friends now. So if you're the one that is the first person, actually, I'll say that. I will Venmo you $20 if you are the first person that I don't know or knows directly somebody that I know who joins the Discord. And if that doesn't happen for the next episode, I'm going to say that again. If I remember. I probably will. Links in the bottom. Okay. Yeah, I hope this wasn't too bad. We'll fucking see. I'm still going to put it up because I'm learning, but I'm going to do my plan a little bit differently next time. All right.